As you can see, we have Doug and Ray with us again. Doug and Ray, welcome to another show of Switched on IT.
Hi there.
Thanks, Barry.
Now, we're going to talk about documents sharing and I guess document management as well today. So Doug Endersby and Ray Sidney Smith, please take it away for us.
Thanks, Barry. Yeah, so today's discussion, document management and file sharing, it's always been a challenge for businesses to make sure that they've got the right sort of tools to manage all their different files. It's very important. You know, we all have contracts, we all have projects which we've documented, and it's vital that we can lay our fingers on those resources. All of our staff can lay their hands on those resources and make sure that they're getting the right ones. So, you know, in that respect, we need to consider also version control, how documents are accessed, and you know, what you actually do to streamline the sharing of them. And I can definitely say, as a business that provides thousands and thousands or tens of thousands of small business operators with their email service, they're very good at emailing around large documents back and forth. Often it's the same document time and time again with very, very minor changes. And that's got all sorts of risks associated with it, because this is where the version control comes into play. So we're going to talk about how to actually solve that problem. Also, certainly in Australia, there's been a practice of businesses, you know, particularly quite large businesses, but all the way down to 1 and 2 person shows, that have had traditionally a file sharing server on premise. It might be just some workstation with a hard drive on it, but they use that as the repository for all the documentation they have in the organization, and everybody is hooked up to that on the network. And that is something that they run locally. But there's some limitations with that as well. So we're seeing a lot of small businesses move away from, you know, the on-premise file sharing model as well. So today with Ray, we're going to be talking about what changes we're seeing coming through in the way people manage these documents, and why, and what we think the best tools out in the marketplace are. What do you have to choose from to get your file sharing management cost effective and bring it under control? So Ray, let's start with you. The on-premise file sharing server of yesterday, for many people, what do you see as the main limitations of an on-premise file sharing server?
Well, the first time you have a fire or a flood or earthquake or power goes out, power surges, power browns. So a lot of people don't realize this, but one of the most damaging things to computers is actually not surging, but it's actually browning. Basically, when the power of a machine dips below its recommended operating rate, and so you then get sort of a dip in its ability to do the work, and so then it stresses the system, and that actually causes far more damage to the hardware over its lifetime. And so, you know, a surge will, if you don't have a surge protector on your hard drive or on your computer, you know, server, it kills it with one shot, right? But you can actually typically recover those systems much more easily, whereas with a system that is running brown, that is running with low energy but not off or not surging, it reduces its life expectancy, and then you end up having to replace servers over and over again. Anyway, but that's one real limitation, is that you have this data storage that's physically in your space, and if something happens in that space, then you have the centralized data loss. And what we're trying to do with modern file sharing is to mitigate that risk. And so we can mitigate that risk by basically creating redundancy. It's not necessarily backup, but it's redundancy, putting that file or the files in multiple locations at once. That creates a number of different benefits. One, you have the ability to access the files from multiple locations, and then multiple people have access to the same files so that you don't have email services or email accounts with dozens and dozens of the same file sitting in your email account. And you don't also have the problem of having the wrong file. If I email Doug a file and Doug then modifies that document, emails it back to me, and then 3 weeks later, I search my email for the file Doug sent to me, but I mistakenly look at the file that I sent to him 3 weeks ago, then I open up the wrong file and start editing it, send that to Doug, and then Doug sends it back to me and says, "This has none of my changes in it." It's a perennial problem that I see with small businesses that lose money, time, and energy in transiting documents back and forth, and ultimately using the wrong documents in that chain of back and forth with files sharing technologies today. We get rid of that because now I send you a link and you are now working on the same exact document that I am, sometimes in real time with some of the tools we'll talk about. And now that creates not only increased efficiency, but also a lack of uncertainty. So it creates clarity as to what document we're talking about and what document is the true version that is the final document.
Absolutely, that is quite a risk for businesses to have people not realizing that they're not working on the latest version of the document. So if all we're emailing back and forth to each other is a hyperlink back into the file sharing service, then the fact that you've sent me an update at 11 a.m. in the morning and then at 4 p.m. in the afternoon we're talking about it, if I click on the link that you sent in the morning, then I'm still going to see the latest version of the document that you may have revised at 3 p.m. in the afternoon. And this has certainly happened to me and people that I work with, where instead of that, people have sent me a document at 11 a.m. They've then sent me a revised version at 3 p.m., jumped on the phone at 3:30 to talk to me about it, and I don't realize that they've actually sent me another email with another attachment, and I've just opened up what they sent me at 11 a.m. and we've discussed that. And it just creates the potential for quite expensive problems to arise when people are literally not on the same page and they think they are. And I think that's one of the greatest benefits of taking control of a file sharing service and using it properly in this way, making sure that you don't send everyone, and after attachment, you'd send them a hyperlink and know that they're looking at the correct information. Now, there's some other limitations.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to poke in and add one of the other side benefits of all of this is that all of the tools we'll be talking about today actually do a secondary layer of security in a lot of ways, in the sense that when you upload a document or even generate the document in some of these systems, it's doing some what we call containerizing. So it's basically putting your documents into an abstract, a layer of security, so that should that document for some reason have malware or potentially harmful application sort of embedded within it, a lot of these systems are looking at that data and identifying that before it infects your system, or at the very least, it's limiting the exposure of that document's security risk to a smaller subset of users, or at least to a smaller subset of devices. So understand that also, that if you have an email that you send along with the Word document and embedded in that Word document is potentially harmful malware. I guess all malware would be harmful, but so if it has malware, say VB scripted based malware embedded in the document, and you open that up and it executes on your system, you're done. But if you're sending back and forth a link, then you're not creating the levels of problems that could occur, because you're now accessing a document inside a system that we know is much more assuredly clean than your native system transiting back and forth email. So we're capable of reducing some of that security risk by virtue of these new systems today as well.
Let me just interrupt you there for a second. We use the sort of thing that you're talking about, Ray, all the time here at the station, because last night we recorded the TRL Footy Show. And once that show has finished recording, the documents all get put onto a file sharing service so that our editor in the United States can pick it up. Now, if I were not able to update that information with the new information, I might end up with the wrong show going to air at 7 o'clock in the morning, whereas I know for certain that Tanya is going to get the correct document, because when I upload it, it simply updates everything.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I think that sort of underscores, the other thing with these file sharing services is that they give you almost limitless version control. So, if we do need to go back to the version of the document as it was at 11 p.m. or the previous day or the previous month, for most of these file sharing services, you can quite easily do that. It's all tracked, it's all audited, and it's all very easy to find and recover from that earlier point in time. So it gives you a really high degree of security, and that's also another in terms of malware and bad scripts that might be embedded in a version. Well, you can always just go back to the earlier version, recover from that, make that the latest version, and essentially you've solved the problem when you do that. So, I think one of the other limitations with the on-premise file sharing service is potentially what the user experience is for clients and staff that are not inside the four walls of the office. Tell us a bit about what the limitations are there, Ray.
Well, I mean, you have to figure out the convenience of giving outsiders and those who work remotely, which we have a lot of that going on today. If you have vendors, say you have a consultant like an accountant or a lawyer or someone else doing work for you, and or a graphic designer or any number of the other extensions of a business, and you need them to have access to those files, and they're resident within your local file server. Well, then they need to physically come to your space and access it. You need to make a copy of it and send it to them. Again, comes back to that email problem. But also, some of these files are very large. I mean, think about Barry's circumstance where he's uploading video that could be several gigabytes worth of size, and transiting that over several thousands of miles around the globe for that work to be done. If he just had it sitting on his system and did not have the type of file sharing tools that we're going to be talking about, he would have to put those onto a DVD or onto a thumb drive and then mail it across the planet. Or he would have to use an FTP server. I mean, you could obviously use an FTP server, and then you'd have to upload it to the FTP server. And most people use FTP, and FTP is not necessarily the most secure way to transit files. There is SFTP, the Secure File Transfer Protocol. Most people don't use it, and so they send, in essence, an almost unencrypted file up to the internet. They place it on the internet and give people access to download it from there. It's clunky. It takes a lot of time. There's all these opportunities for things to go wrong in that process, and you have to be a technical user. I mean, most people are not like you and I, Doug. They wouldn't know what an FTP server is, how to install an FTP client, and how to manage those kinds of things. It creates all of these external problems that are not necessary. So I think that having tools like the ones we'll be talking about, I think, really help to streamline the processes and make them much more easy for people to share with them, again, in a secure fashion.
Absolutely. I think that in terms of the usability, that is just such a key thing in how people are now using file sharing services, because at the end of the day, we all know how to, save something back to the hard drive on our computer, maybe create a folder and put similar documents in the one folder, and maybe create a subfolder, do all those sorts of things. And with these file sharing services, all we're really doing is just reading that structure that we've already created on a server in a data center that we can access in real time. So in terms of what it asks of the user, it is only asking of the user a practice that they already currently use. And I think that is the beauty of the user experience with file sharing systems today.
Agreed.
Now, in terms of, so we've talked about where we've evolved from. So businesses used to have on-premise file sharing services or file sharing service. Doesn't really make any sense. They're you've got to make sure that they're backed up, that they're secure. You've got to make sure that you don't lose the data. You're liable to flood, fire, theft, all the sort of bad things that can happen to any hardware device that's on premise. You've also got the inferior user experience for people that don't happen to be on premise but need to access the files there. So we've now got the file sharing services that are based in data centers. Ray, can you sort of tick off for us the list of services that exist today that people are commonly using?
Yeah. So the kind of the big gorilla in the room is probably Dropbox. And before we started recording, you were saying that Dropbox is probably the dominant tool that a lot of Australian businesses are using for managing files in the cloud. Then you have the two behemoths in the market. You have Microsoft with their OneDrive product, and then you have Google with the Google Drive product. And we have a bunch of other smaller players in the market who satisfy and serve various needs. I'm happy to talk about those if we need to at the end. But we also know that you have done quite a bit of research in terms of finding the right tools for your hosting clients. So I hope that we can spend some time talking about the tool that you've invested in at Oz Hosting, because I think that's also really key in kind of seeing how other companies are overcoming the challenges, especially as it relates to GDPR and other kinds of data sovereignty laws and data privacy laws that are coming across. Here in the United States, for example, we are facing the problem of not only the extraterritorial law of GDPR coming into the United States. Not that the U.S. hasn't done the same thing. I mean, we obviously have done. We've implemented laws that then other people have to follow. So I'm not saying that we're not guilty of that also. But with GDPR, we have businesses who don't think that they need to follow those rules, and then we are United States, so we are a country of many different sovereign provinces, and the problem we're seeing is that we now have, I think, 3 states in our union that have implemented their own data privacy and data protection laws. And so if you are a citizen of one of those states, right, a resident of one of those states, you are protected differently than the residents of other states in the US. So now you have to apply different rules to how you display, say, your website or file sharing with those people. So hopefully in the future, we have federal legislation that helps to create a uniform data privacy and data protection law for all citizens of the United States. But until then, we're kind of in this limbo. And so I basically said to everybody, let's just adhere to GDPR, which is probably the most safe middle ground for everybody. And so tools like the one that you've implemented, really do help us all stay compliant before we need to be, not just because it's going to make sure that we are staying within the regulatory boundaries of our needs under the law, but it also is probably the right thing to do. It's the ethical thing to do to make sure that we're protecting our customers and our customers' digital identities and their digital data.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think the data sovereignty thing is become a big issue all around the world, and I know that the businesses that are offering file sharing services are really having to consider that now. They typically thought, look, we just want to have minimal hardware footprint. You can always understand why that would be. I mean, redundancy, but limit the number of implementations that you have. And it seems to me that in so many countries around the world now, that's just not going to cut it, because, they want to protect their citizens. And, whether it's healthcare information or financial information, tax files, tax returns, any of that sort of information, at the very least, if your file sharing service provider is in the same country as you, then your legal remedies to try and, if the cost or the negative impact on your business or on you as an individual has been significant, if you're going to try and get some compensation, it's obviously going to be a lot easier if the entity that you need to balance is going to be a local entity. And I think that's one of the reasons that sovereignty has become such a big issue for our customers. And our experience has been that we do have a lot of our customers are in healthcare, they're in law, they're in finance, they're in accounting, so they do have all this sensitive information, and there are actually laws, the Data Privacy Act and so on, that dictate that they have to have that data in Australia, and if they have any sort of a breach, they need to notify in Australia it's the Office of the Australian Privacy Commissioner, and it's mandatory that you notify the Privacy Commissioner if there has been some sort of a data breach. So yeah, we've got a bit of a backdrop with these changes coming through in the system, and I think that's kind of created a lot more interest in local TrotAid.
Is your computer driving you crazy? Is it slow or doing things you didn't expect? Well, having a computer crash or pick up a virus can be a complete nightmare for a business, so having someone local you can trust to get you up and running again is critical. The dedicated team of experts at Computer Troubleshooters Toowoomba West will put your mind at ease from the moment you walk through the door and will get your problem solved in no time, with a 100% guarantee on their work. Laptops, tablets, PCs, whatever you have, Roger and the team can fix it for you. So visit them today at 236 Bridge Street, Newtown. Can't get in to see them? No worries. Just call them on 4642 1331 and they'll come to you. Toowoomba Troubleshooters Toowoomba West on the web at www.computertroubleshooters.com.au/Toowoomba West.
Oz Hosting is proud to support Switched On IT in bringing practical help to Australian businesses. We're talking to literally hundreds of businesses every day about their IT services, how to make them more efficient, how to make their businesses more efficient, and how to protect their valuable data. If you'd like your IT services securely hosted right here in Australia and expertly managed, talk to Oz Hosting.
Well, folks, 17th and 18th of August, you're going to find yourself right here at Leeburn for the 24th running of the annual Leeburn Sprint. It's being brought to you by Power TV. Well, this year, of course, with all of the action on track, we're bringing you a whole host of events right throughout the weekend. But keep in mind that we're bringing you some great drivers from yesteryear as well. Dick Johnson's back. Freddie Gibson's here for the first time. Colin Bond's coming for a look. And also KB Kevin Bartlett, just to name a few. Now, if you're not here, you can watch this broadcast over the 2 days via the guys from Power TV. What an innovation, bringing you all of the Sprint events right here in Leeburn, live via network streaming. Cannot ask for anything more. What a great innovation. 2 days of great racing action. Beautiful weather as always. If you haven't got your camping organised, make sure you get that organised before you come out. Or if you're just coming out for the day trip, keep in mind we've got some great show and shines on throughout the weekend as well. And what a weekend this is going to be. Hope you guys are all enjoying this, because I can tell you what, this is more of what's to come from the Leeburn Sprints right here on the 17th and 18th of August in downtown Leeburn.
Yeah, thanks, Ray. So we've given a little bit of airtime to GDPR, but we haven't really explained to the listeners what that actually is. Do you want to give us a quick overview of what GDPR stands for and what it is, why it's relevant?
Sure. So in the so minute or less, GDPR actually stands for the General Data Protection Regulation, at least in English. And so GDPR is a law that extends to EU citizens, and the idea is that EU citizens have some fundamental rights that are they're inalienable. So by virtue of being an EU citizen, they have these rights. It follows them wherever they are globally. So wherever someone is, this type of data, whether that be what's classified as personal data or personal sensitive data, is theirs. In essence, the EU citizen has a right to consent, meaning that is they have a right for the data you collect about them for them to give you access to that data. It immediately says that my data is my data as an EU citizen, and so therefore you can't take my data without my consent. They have a right of access, meaning they have a right to access their own data, meaning that if I visit your website and you collect data about me, I have a right to access that data. They have a right to portability, meaning that I have a right to be able to transit that data in a usable format under the GDPR. I have a right to rectification, meaning that I have a right to fix the data. So if you have something that is erroneous about me in your system, say you have a case management system or a CRM, and you've been collecting data about me and it is wrong, I have a right to have you correct that data about me so that it is correct. And I have a right to erasure. I have a right to be unknown to you. And that means that I can request to you to be forgotten in your system, and you then under GDPR have an obligation as a business to remove my personal data or my personal sensitive data from that. That's just the kind of the basics of the rights. There are many rights given to the EU citizen within the GDPR, and I'll have Barry put the link on the screen. But if you go to my podcast, webandbeyondcast.com, episode 11, I actually fully explicate GDPR so that, if you know nothing about GDPR, hopefully by the end of the episode, you know a little bit more about it and what you could do to be compliant with it, because it does affect every business. It's not just businesses that are within the EU walls. It is actually every business that's affected by EU, because your website is visited by EU citizens. You may have EU clients, and anytime EU citizens' data comes into contact with your databases, you are now subject to it for that EU citizen. So don't think that you can just avoid it. They come with very, very steep fines. And you're talking upwards of 20 million euros for some of the fines. So you're not talking about chump change here. You're talking about real dollars that can shut down your business if they can prosecute you. So just be mindful of that. So,
Ray, is this what we are seeing on sites now, where we see the cookie acceptance thing on the bottom of the screen? Is that part of this?
Yeah, that is one part of it. The annoyance of seeing all of these cookie policies being notifying users. Unfortunately, it hasn't really helped anyone. It hasn't made anyone's experience better to know that they have cookie policies, because most people don't know what a cookie is, and so they just accept it to make it go away. And so we are going to see some unnatural growths out of GDPR and other types of data protection and privacy laws and data notification and data breach laws that will create some problems for us. One is the usability of a website. We show up at a website and it says to us, if you don't accept our cookies, you have to leave. That's kind of ridiculous. But yes, that is one of the outcomes of GDPR and GDPR-like laws globally.
Yeah, because I would think that that's the thing that people will be able to say, well, yeah, okay, and I've seen that, so now I know the sort of thing we're talking about.
Yeah, and you know, the reality is that GDPR goes far beyond just placing a cookie policy on your site. But as you said, that's probably the thing that most people will come into contact with the most as it relates to GDPR and data privacy laws writ large.
Okay, there you go. So GDPR, so that's going to affect all of us, or it does affect all of us right now. And in terms of the major file sharing services, we were talking before about Google Drive, OneDrive, Dropbox, and so on. Ray, do you want to just take us through a very quick overview of these common file sharing services?
Sure. So let's start off with Dropbox. Dropbox is probably the most predominant and well-known of the services, and what you really have is a file sharing and redundancy-based system. So you have a cloud provider, Dropbox, and they give you a piece of software. You install that on each machine or mobile device where you want to have access to those files, and then you dedicate a folder or several folders that you want synchronized across those devices. And so in essence, what happens is if you, Doug, have 3 computers and two mobile devices, a mobile phone and maybe an iPad, you can install Dropbox on all of those devices and then say any documents that are in this folder on this one computer then get replicated. They become redundant across all of those systems, and so therefore I can have access to them. Now, when it comes to the mobile devices, that's actually not true, but it's actually true redundancy, because you have access to those files, but they're not actually living on the mobile device. You can, in essence, it's just an opportunity to access them, download them individually one by one. But for the actual computers, Windows or Mac devices, or Linux for those who use a Linux distro, you would then have a synchronized file. And so if I put a file on one computer, it would then copy it up to the Dropbox file in the cloud account and then download it to the folder on each of those devices. And the same thing happens when I change that, modify that file, then the same modification will then be replicated across the system. If I were to delete that file, then it would be deleted across the system, which is why it's not backup, it's just redundancy and file sharing. And so the benefit then is that if I want to share a file with you, Doug, then all I have to do is go into Dropbox and say, share this with Doug, and it will, if you're not a user, it will invite you to become a user, which is free for the base plan, and then you then have access to the same file or folder of files that I do. And so now it will synchronize those documents to your system as well. And now if I open up a document, make a change, save it, it'll then be in the folder already, so it automatically makes those changes, and those changes happen live now on my system as well. So we're working on, in essence, the same document from a practical perspective.
Yeah, very good. And how does that differ from, for example, Google Drive or OneDrive?
Oh gosh, in almost every way. So Dropbox actually has a very nice feature that allows you to be able to annotate alongside a document, and I really like that feature. But it is completely different than the way in which, say, Google Drive works in essence. So if we look at Google Drive actually has 2 different layers to it. Google Drive has the built-in tools in which you are creating documents and collaborating on those documents in Google's own format. So Google, the Google Documents platform, Google Docs, Google Slides, Google Sheets, Google Forms, all of those are native web-based formats where when you're creating those documents, they're all living in the cloud only. You're not downloading them to your local system at all. Then you have the Google Drive functionality that allows you to say you create a Word document. You can put that into Google Drive, install an application just like Google Drive, and now synchronize that document across multiple systems. So then you have both the Dropbox functionality, but then you also have a cloud collaboration and productivity suite that's built into it as well. So I think that's why there's some confusion for people sometimes because they're not sure quite what's what in Google. But you actually have both functions. You have the ability for me to open up a Google Doc. I can share that Google document with you, Doug, and we can collaborate on that document. So I can have you and my closest 500 friends all log into the same Google document, and we can live chat, we can comment, we can use version editing, we can suggest changes to the document, not just edit, but we can suggest changes where we can accept and reject changes to the document, and that can all be done in real time inside of a Google Docs document or a Google Slides document, Google Sheets, Google Present, Google Slides, or otherwise. So very, very different than Dropbox, which is not allowing you for real-time collaboration and real-time editing of a document in the browser or via mobile application. Then we switch gears to OneDrive, and OneDrive, at least in the non-consumer version, so in the business version, Office 365 or otherwise, it's really a walled garden again, where you have the ability to upload files and use it within the organization, but there's actually very limited ability for you to be able to share that outside the organization. And you probably experience this and know more about this than I do, so you can probably speak to this in terms of OneDrive's capabilities. But in essence, you have the ability to create documents within Office products. Those are backed up or saved up to that cloud storage space, and then they're available to all the other users you want them to be available to within the organization. Once you go outside of the organization, say with a client or a vendor or someone else, then you can provide, say, a link to that document if you want them to be able to view it. But for them to be able to edit and do real-time collaboration, that really requires them to be brought into the Office 365 or the inside of the organization's walls, which is impractical and usually not worth it. Which is funny because in the consumer product, say if you have just a live.com account, you can actually real-time edit and collaborate with people without any problem. There's really not much of a walled garden when it comes to that. But of course, then there's lack of security, So I feel like G Suite and Google Drive has helped solve that problem, because whether I'm using G Suite as a business user or a Google account as a consumer user, I have the ability to share inside and outside of my organization with anyone, and I'm capable of restricting access and changing access pretty quickly. So I feel like if it's a OneDrive to Google Drive perspective, Google Drive really does provide a much stronger sharing and collaboration functionality from a security perspective, while still giving you convenience there. But of course, if you're in the Office 365 world and you're comfortable with it, then you're very unlikely to be able to step beyond that until you get to something like the product you're going to talk about, which is what you've done at Oz Hosting, which I think is really interesting. So can you tell us a little bit about what you've done with the Rush Files product and how it works with regard to your clients that do use it?
Yeah, sure. So we've got a lot of customers using Office 365 and various other services where there is a file sharing capability, and we've got a lot of customers that we're using also Dropbox. But so many of our customers are either governed by data sovereignty regulations themselves, so they might be in healthcare or law or finance where they've got tax return information, and the data that they're controlling has got to stay in Australia. So there is then a problem that they would have with a service such as Dropbox, where at the moment it's going to be all in North America. And so they needed a file sharing service, and then OneDrive, because it doesn't allow them to actually create a user account or share a folder outside of the organization, that was a little bit limiting. So we turned to a product which was developed in Denmark called Rush Files, and that has the advantage that it's GDPR compliant. But the other thing that our customers like about it is that we actually give them the ability to create users for no additional cost. So it's not like a Dropbox service, business grade Dropbox, where it's $20 for each additional user. They're free, so they're just buying storage from us, and they get a terabyte of storage, and then they can create as many users as they like. So they might have 10 internal staff, Well, that would cost them on Dropbox, that would cost them a couple of $100 a month. But what if they've got 20 or 30 clients or vendors or suppliers that they want to share securely very important information to those other external stakeholders? With the Rush File service, they can just create a user account for each of those stakeholders, and that will then allow that stakeholder to simply log in, install the agent will install automatically on their device, and they'll have a folder, and in the folder will be all the different files and folders that potentially our customer is their a party that they do business with can share everything that they want to share with them. So I'll give you an idea of a use case. So we've got up in Townsville a big plumbing contracting company, and they've got all their staff going out on site working with different subcontractors and clients. So when they go out on site, there's a mobile app that they can put on a tablet or on their mobile phone for Rush Files. And if they're working on something and there's some issues with it, they can immediately take a photograph, even a little video. They can then click share. It will show the Rush Files app on their mobile phone. That when they click on that will open up the folder structure, and it might be client number 1. We don't have the right materials here, or we've bumped into a problem in the wall where we can't dig out the pipe, or whatever it might be. They can instantly share that back to head office, and head office can then make the assessment. Do you need additional equipment? We need to send people out there, and it's all happening instantly. And that can also be shared with the client as well, so they might have a client share folder as well. So that is very much streamlined the ability of that organisation to get important information back and forth securely, and not force them to have to buy, for example, Dropbox subscriptions for the external parties. They can just at will give any external party a user account, and they can get all the information that they deem fit to share with them. So that's how we've set up Rush Files in Australia, and we're finding it a really good alternative to deal with some of the limitations our customer base were bumping into with some of those other services, whether it was data sovereignty or whether it was the ability to share material beyond your own organisation.
Yeah, and to clarify, you said that the company that developed it was in Norway. You said
Denmark.
Denmark, yes. How can I forget?
Yeah.
I love Copenhagen. But you're hosting those files in Australia so that the Australian companies can be comfortable with the data sovereignty laws that they have to comply with.
Exactly. So the Rush Files folks helped us deploy all the hardware, all the infrastructure in an Australian government endorsed data centre, so that we tick all the boxes in terms of where the actual data is located and where the service works from.
Yeah, great. I just wanted to be clear about that so that people weren't confused, and I think that's I think that's going to happen in each country as they start to write this type of legislation and enact it, and each country is going to have to really deal with that issues that when you have protected particular entities or particular individuals that are protected classes of data, who have protected classes of data, those businesses are then going to have to look to services like yours to make sure that they're complying with it. And I think that's really important for everybody to take heart with, is that you just can't use any service anywhere. If you start using you're collecting and holding certain types of data and you want to protect your customers, that makes a lot of sense. So, great.
Thanks, Ray. And I think that's a really good overview of where we've come from in this world where, people used to have a on-premise file sharing server, and now we've got all these different options. And I think we can see here, I think we've covered, quite well what the different use cases are for those different types of file sharing services.
Yeah, and in a future episode, we'll talk about backups and backing up your data. And I think that'll be a nice marriage with us and our discussion here on managing files and file sharing services.
Yeah, terrific. I look forward to that. Over to you, Barry.
Terrific. Thank you very much, guys. Again, another really interesting session. I think these are the sorts of things that businesses not only need to know, but will want to have information about. So that's great. Now, Doug, just tell us if somebody wants to get information about how Oz Hosting can help them with Rush Files, how do they contact you?
Yeah, the easiest thing is just to come to our website, ozhosting.com.au. There's always our phone numbers there, our 1300 number, and there's also information about the file sharing services.
Terrific. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much, gentlemen. We will catch up with you again next week.
Thanks, Barry.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks, Ray. Talk soon.
Thanks, bye.
Thanks, Barry. Bye.